We good?
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Italian wine glasses
Yes.
for Italian ladies. Okay. Hi. Welcome to the Mystic Sisters podcast. I'm Julie.
I'm Amy.
We are the Mystic Sisters. We have not had an episode in a while. And today it's just the two of us. No host, no guest. But we just saw the Barbie movie and we wanted to talk about it because we have a lot of thoughts.
We have a lot to say.
A lot of thoughts. We played with Barbies when we were little all the time. Loved Barbies. Obviously, this movie has been marketed in our faces like no other in recent memory. So, and it's dealing with issues of feminism and culture and women. So we wanted to dive in.
Yeah.
And go see it. So
we saw it about
an hour
ago. Yeah.
Okay. So first, what did we like about the Barbie movie?
First, I think the main thing we liked and why we wanted to see it was because of the analog special effects and the handmade sets. There was very little CGI in it. There was this. So maybe we should say there's spoilers ahead.
Oh yeah, tons of spoilers.
Tons of spoilers ahead. Turn this off if you haven't seen it. You don't want spoilers. So there were scenes where they would transition between the Barbie land world and the real world, and the sets were just absolutely beautiful. You could tell things were like handmade and like things were on strings, and it was almost kind of 90s looking, like an old like what was it, 9 Inch Nails kind of video.
I read that they used effects from the 50s because that's the year Barbie was released. So we respect.
We love that. And it was beautiful colors and mod and amazing costumes and makeup. And it was really funny. We were laughing a lot. Barbie doesn't have like real food to eat or water, so she'll like every morning take a drink and it just like doesn't pour into her mouth and she's happy about it. And there were a lot of one-liners that were funny. Ken was like a doofus and competitive with the other Kens, and that was hilarious. There was probably one of the highlights was Weird Barbie, which is like a Barbie that's all mangled, that like everyone knows a girl has a girlfriend that had like a screwed up Barbie that she like overplayed with or like scribbled on or cut its hair, and this was a character. Her like legs bend too far.
She was always doing a split,
like her legs always in the air. It was really funny. Really great lines. And the discontinued Barbies, like pregnant midge. And the narrator was like, let's just be honest, like it's weird. No one wants a pregnant doll. Like it was just a little too weird. So yeah.
And like we were talking also about how when we played with Barbies, Ken was always kind of like, he was a part of the scenes and like part of our play, but he was always kind of ridiculous. And they captured that in the movie. Like he's kind of pathetic and ridiculous. And I think that's how we played with him.
Should we tell the story?
We have to tell the story. Yeah. So my Ken doll, when I was little, my dog chewed his head off. And so I go to my dad, please fix my Ken doll. The body of the doll is hollow. So my dad put a clothespin in his body as like a fake neck and then stuck the head on. So then we had this doll where his head would spin around 360 degrees and we could remove the head and like make him do crazy things. And
we were always popping the head off and having him spin around and go, whoa, and like be ridiculous. So Ken was always just like a doofus in playing. I think most girls played with Barbies that way.
Yeah.
It was mostly playing house with the Barbies. And then like Ken was like, we don't know what to do with them because you're too young to understand like the role of a husband.
Like, yeah. And what guys are
and what guys are like. So you just can't even make it up at that age.
Yeah. So. But if you please leave a comment, tell us how you played with Ken because we made him really silly.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what we liked.
Yes.
Anything else?
Those were the highlights.
Right,
now the criticism.
And now the criticism.
Of which we have a lot, because it was a hot mess. This movie was a hot mess. I was cringing almost the entire last hour. I was just like, what are they doing? What is this? And I'm like whispering to her.
We're not.
It doesn't. For a fantasy movie, you're not like transported into a fantasy world. You're like talking to what? You're like, what?
It's hard to suspend your disbelief when things are a hot mess.
Hot mess.
So into the hot mess commentary that we have. Okay, Amy, what did you think about the writing and the dialogue overall?
So the one thing I noticed was that a lot of the dialogue was way too academic and feministy, and there were all these like long quotes about patriarchy and capitalism, and it was just not for kids at all. And I noticed like we live in a kind of like a more rural area, and I think it's more working class, and probably a lot of people who didn't go to college and certainly didn't take gender studies. And they weren't, and I liked a lot of that dialogue. I laughed at it because I understand it because went to college, but I could tell they weren't understanding it or laughing. It was like too academic for like your average family and working class family, and it definitely wasn't for kids. So that was annoying. I don't know. It's funny for me, but I was like, this isn't really accessible to normal people that aren't like steeped in gender discourse like us, sadly, like terminally online people. But yeah, and then yeah, there were like some really good quips though that were like painfully present. Like Ken told Barbie, "You can be my super casual, low commitment, long distance girlfriend," and that was just like hit, because if you're like, you know, a millennial or a Zoomer online, that's a thing.
It speaks to the broken social scripts of our age, right? You were like, that shouldn't even be
Yes.
a thing, but it's like in this
But it is a
movie
thing. Yeah. It's
because
like,
of the
yeah,
thing.
this is a movie that's very much of its time because of, yeah.
And I felt like the injection of political dialogue, like for instance, there's a scene where Barbie meets the girl who's playing with her, or who she thinks is playing with her
In the real
and
world.
in the real world. And she's like, calls her a fascist and says she's consumerist and capitalist, all these like ideological buzzwords are thrown in, and it just, that pulls you out of the story and into the real world too much. Like when you go see a movie, you want to be able to be indulging in some
In a
fantasy
story,
world,
not political discourse.
it made it too like current and like kind of just made me wince, because it's just like
there was a lot of political discourse, then it wasn't a story.
yeah. And America's so political right now that like
you want an escape.
escapism. Movies are about escapism, and so injecting that stuff, sure, you are capturing the commentary that has surrounded Barbie for the last 50 years or whatever, fine, but there's got to be a way to like do that in a way that has tact instead of just like throwing it in your face.
Well, and all the dialogue just, it made me like sad, because I was like, this is like it's cringe that we're even all like talking about gender roles all the time, because that means things are very broken and the social scripts are so broken, and like now it's in movies, like I can't even get away from it in a movie.
Right.
So okay, so Julie, moving on, and this is like pretty meaty, I think. The media was calling this movie a hero's journey. Do you think that it lived up to that?
No. I think it had the skeleton of what could have been a really good hero's journey film, where something goes wrong in Barbie land, Barbie leaves, and she experiences the real world. Maybe when she's there, it's very foreign. I mean, definitely, it's very foreign. She's a fish out of water. She doesn't know how to navigate it. Maybe she learns there's good and bad in the real world, and then she brings the good back to improve Barbie land. Like that's the hero's journey arc, right? The hero leaves home, goes to this foreign land, fights battles, learns, brings the gold back to his community, right? To improve his home. This was not that. Like it was actually just a mess.
It was a mess.
Hard to like tell you what happened and what the plot was, because she does leave and come back. But when she comes back home, she finds her home has been taken over by Kens, who are implementing patriarchy, which Ken learned about when he went to the real world. But it was just really a poorly executed hero's journey. And I kind of felt like even like Barbie's inner conflict wasn't like, well, maybe we could talk about this later, but like her inner conflict wasn't even well established. Like, what are the things that Barbie's struggling with? We didn't get a good sense of it. Maybe they could have zoned in a little bit more on like her struggling with having to be perfect or having to be everything. But instead she just sort of gets like,
she randomly gets the idea that
weird about death,
death exists
and cellulite, and then which, okay, but just the way she like interacted with the real world had some funny moments, but
huge missed opportunity.
just a big missed opportunity. And what kept coming to mind for us were a few movies. So Elf, Life Size, and Legally Blonde. Those are all stories where you have some sort of like kind of almost supernatural sort of character, who magical character, let's say, because in Legally Blonde she is a human, but she's in like the bright flashy world of California, and she leaves her bright flashy world where everything's great and perfect in her sorority, and she goes to Harvard where things are dull and weird and difficult and there's struggle, and she's a fish out of water, right? And I even felt like I would have loved more of like an Elle Woods personality on Barbie, where she's like, I wanted to see Barbie be more effervescent, like, oh my God, like, and like everything's like bright and shiny, and just the way she relates to people, like I even felt like her character just wasn't like bubbly enough. Okay, And so in Legally Blonde, she learns things in this new world and eventually does thrive there. In Elf, magical character leaves his home, fish out of water, interacts with New York City, isn't getting it right. It's difficult. Things aren't perfect. There's struggle. He learns, he saves the day. It all wraps up with a shiny bow at the end.
And then he goes between worlds with
bridges
yeah,
the
now he's a bridge between the worlds. And
he
and I just think Life Size did the doll thing so much better.
Yes, talk about Life Size.
So I want to talk about Life Size because it's all I could think about. So in Life Size, it's an old straight to VHS movie with Tyra Banks and Lindsay Lohan. And Lindsay Lohan, her mother passed away, and she does this spell to try to bring her mother back to life, but she does it wrong and instead accidentally brings her new doll back to life. And she doesn't like dolls; it was a gift. And suddenly Tyra Banks is full grown and alive in her bedroom when she wakes up one morning. And what happens is that Lindsay Lohan is like frustrated and she's trying to get her to be a doll again and find the right spell so she can put her back in her world. But what actually happens, it's really tender, is they form kind of like a mother-daughter relationship where the doll becomes like helps her with her hardships, and they develop a relationship. And then but then the doll faces conflict because her sales are low. In Eve is, which that's a great name for the doll.
Yeah.
We love it. The world of Eve, the sales are tanking, and she's like, girls aren't buying my doll anymore because they don't relate to my doll. Eve is always perfect. I need to go back and make. And
the little girl helps her realize you're too perfect.
You're too perfect.
You're not relatable.
You're not relatable for little girls. So the Tyra Banks, the doll, chooses to go become a doll again, and then she like fixes the image of Eve and she makes her like a little more like humble and relatable for little girls, and then the sales go up. It is a great movie.
Great movie.
And
it's
a great doll movie, and it's so much more like tender and human than this hot mess. This was just mess. I cannot explain to you how
it was a mess. And I would have even not I didn't even mind like the idea of Ken. So they start this movie off with Barbie Land being all run by Barbies, all women in power, feminist world, totally feminist, right? Yeah. Women are the president, they're the Supreme Court, they're the astronauts, they're everything. And I do kind of like the idea of Ken going into the real world and discovering the idea of like patriarchy. They didn't use that word though. He was like, men seem to be in charge here. And then implementing it in Barbie Land, and then having then the other gender takes over, and that's a different kind of tyranny, right?
And it's another caricature, because like Barbie's like kind of a caricature of femininity, and then what Ken implements is a caricature of male dominance, right? Like, yeah, what are some of the tropes? He like wants women to just give him beers and not talk, and he's like, he should have been obsessed with football. That was a missed thing, whatever.
Yeah, but like even that's a cool idea, right? Okay, but then what happens in the Barbie movie is that the Barbies start to break the women out of their patriarchal programming and convince and get them back on their side so they can overthrow the patriarchy and implement the matriarchy again, essentially, which is so stupid. It was such a missed opportunity for Ken and Barbie to look at one another and go, let's work together. Let's make this world good for both of us. I liked the idea of Ken being disgruntled because everything's about Barbie and her friends. That's kind of interesting, right? Yeah. And that she's almost like suppressing him, right? Which is kind of what feminists want to do.
They even make... when he's in the real world, he talks to a man and he says something about, are men in charge here? And he's like
we pretend they are.
No, he says something about how
hide it better.
Well, no. Before that, he says something about how it's like actually harder for men now because of like feminism is always like going. I don't know.
So even that narrative is breaking down in the movie where they're trying to establish
that narrative's even broken in the movie.
They're trying to establish that the real world is dominated.
It's like not anymore.
But this one character is like, well, actually, not really anymore, because it's true. Yeah, like, not really anymore. So it's almost like it feels like the movie's commenting on a world that doesn't exist.
I'm like, because if they were really in the real world in LA, they would see like gay flags and like, women's rights stuff everywhere. Like, so it wasn't even an accurate depiction of the real world.
It's like the real world in Barbie is sort of depicted as the feminist fantasy world that they're always fighting, that they think is real, which isn't.
Yes. That's where construction workers are just like grabbing their crotches and yelling at you, which is like has never been my experience of construction workers. Where does that come from?
We don't like how movies portray construction workers. They're not.
That's a stereotype, and it's mean.
It's mean. It's like, and they could have definitely played with Barbie, like finding out the real world isn't perfect.
Or that even that some sexism does exist. Like,
Sure.
of course it does. Like, sure. Like,
Yep.
that's
Her
not,
getting hit on was kind of like, I think that's kind of interesting.
yeah, it
being
was,
like,
and she was like, people are, and she's like, there's like a violent undertone to this. She said
Yep.
at one point, and it's like, yeah, sometimes that's the case. Like,
Mhm.
not everyone is benevolent. Like, that should have been what they faced. Like, they went into the real world and it was really complicated, and they should have portrayed the complication of gender dynamics in the real world in 2023 better. And they just, but you know, I guess this movie was written by feminists and they don't have a clear lens of it anyway.
Yeah,
so
it's true. I'd love to talk about the mother character and her daughter, because when Barbie first goes to the real world, she thinks she's looking for the little girl who's playing with her, and she ends up finding the little girl, and then her mother is a central character. I don't know. What did we think about those characters and that dynamic and how those characters were written?
So they were almost completely unnecessary characters. First of all, the daughter's like grumpy and mean and horribly unlikable, and then the magic is really like, I can suspend my disbelief, but I need some logic to the magic of a movie. Like, okay, yeah, we'll go with it. And this was just like, what? Like, the mother started to. Turns out that the mother was actually the one playing with the doll because she like missed her daughter, and she was drawing like weird pictures of Barbie as having an existential crisis, and Barbie's like connected to the real person playing with her in Barbie Land, and that's where she was getting the death thoughts from. It was sense. Even explaining it to you, I'm like, this sounds so stupid, and how did this get past the studio?
Yeah,
like, this doesn't make any sense. So it was horrible writing.
And yeah, and the thing that's really touching about the movie Life Size is that the little girl, she's complicated, right? She's upset that her mother's dead.
She's kind of a tomboy.
She's kind of a tomboy. She's not very feminine. And this doll comes into her life and kind of has fun with her and shows her it's fun to be feminine and dress up and play, and also comforts her over her mother's death and all of these things. But Barbie and the little girl in this movie have no relationship except for the little girl screaming at her, calling her a fascist, calling her like consumerist, whatever. And just, there's a terrible scene where Barbie approaches her and
she makes Barbie cry.
She makes Barbie
it's
cry,
so bad.
but then they never reconcile it.
No.
Barbie has no relation to the daughter who she thought was playing with her, and that's never even played out in the movie. Instead, the mother is the one who has a relationship to Barbie and has some sentimentality towards Barbie.
Completely unbelievable.
And then helps Barbie overthrow the patriarchy in Barbie Land. The whole thing is just like a mess.
It is a mess of a story.
And if you're a little girl watching this movie, who are you connecting with on that
I could
screen?
tell the kids didn't care.
I think this is a movie
in the theater.
They're like, it makes me, it almost feels like the movie was written by millennial women who don't have kids or something. But I know Gerwig does have a baby, but it's like there's nothing there for children. Almost. Yeah,
except the visuals.
The visuals.
But like, other than that, I'm like, they're not like, can't be with this movie at all because it's too much academic jargon and political discourse.
It's like, almost like commenting on like higher level things that are older women's issues.
Yeah. And
it just doesn't
like the contradict, like they, oh my God. And at one point, America Ferrera goes on this long like diatribe about the contradictions with being a woman, and it was like, I was like, okay, like I'm not here for this seeing a movie. Like, I get enough of this like on Twitter. Okay, like I want away from this where it's like, yes, it's hard to be a woman, we're expected a lot, and like we always like whatever, but you fail a lot of things because of your nature, whatever. And that was exhausting. There were a lot of scenes where I was like, can this stop? Yeah. Can this stop? Please?
The Ken
oh my God,
dance scene was weird.
Yeah, Ken's dance scene was horrible.
A lot of it was just breaking our brains. We were just like,
it was so like, as a human, it felt like it was trying to like pull me apart. It was just like the story had no narrative arc or any of the like archetypal things necessary for a good story. It was just brokenness, and that actually reflects our society perfectly. It's the perfect movie for 2023 where no one can make sense of anything and everything's a mess and everyone's like confused about gender. That is, so it's the perfect movie for 2023, and it's just filtered through Barbie.
And that's why I broke your brain.
Yeah.
So okay, so what about beauty standards are like a key conflict, right, in our culture, especially when it comes to Barbie. Everyone talks about Barbie setting up some like unrealistic beauty standard, and obviously there's been this whole movement to represent different types of women in media and things, and to almost like get rid of beauty standards, I would say.
Yeah.
So we were speaking about this. Is having a beauty standard, an ideal standard of beauty, wrong?
I don't think so. I think that a lot of criticism is built on the assumption that, yes, an ideal beauty standard is wrong. When you hear people talk, they're operating from that point of view. And if you ask them, they'll kind of like dodge the question. It's like, well, you have to answer this question first. Is an ideal beauty standard wrong? I think it makes sense to have like a vision of perfection and idealism as a culture, and every culture kind of creates that. But what's never communicated that I think needs to be communicated that would calm a lot of people down and they're upset about it is that the whole point of an ideal is that it is an ideal and a fantasy and you cannot reach it. It's just what we can envision as like getting close to an idea of perfection in heaven.
Because there's no heaven on earth.
Because we're on earth. Yeah. There's no, and then I think our friend like questioned this, like, why do you need an ideal standard of beauty? And it's like, it's nice to have, it's natural, it's just human, and we like to have things to strive for. I think, yes, it can hurt you if you don't have that piece of where like, but you'll never reach this, okay? Like even Margot Robbie is, I'm sure she has flaws that are being covered up by like makeup or whatever. Like, she's very beautiful, but who knows? Like, like I'm sure she has like flaws and things that she needs to cover up, like every human being does. Like Kim Kardashian has like really bad eczema, right? But you wouldn't know it because she covers it up. But people look at her as a beauty standard, but even she isn't reaching the ideal, right? So,
and you were also saying how if there's nothing to strive for, it's nihilism, right?
Yes.
If there's no perfect or ideal or something to strive for, then nothing matters.
Then nothing matters.
Why do anything?
And why do anything? Nothing matters, doesn't matter. And that's a horrible place to be in. So
yeah,
you have to have everything's about relationship. Like you have to have a good relationship with the ideal and be like, that's an ideal, but I'm not going to like put pressure on myself to the point of hurting myself to reach that. And I'm going to be like, I mean, you hear realistic beauty standards a lot, but that's like an oxymoron. It's like a beauty standard, like can't really be also realistic entirely.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of
some of them aren't. Yeah.
Some of them aren't. And then my friend was also saying they change. And that's true. They're kind of time and place dependent. Like, in the being overweight used to be more of a beauty standard because it meant you had food to eat and you weren't like a peasant. So they change, they're fickle. Don't feel bad about yourself. But I also don't think it's bad to have beauty standards. Yeah.
Well said.
Also, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So go ahead.
So the other thing happening in this movie was Rhea Perlman's character, and
we love Rhea Perlman.
We do love Rhea Perlman.
Danny DeVito's ex-wife.
Yeah, because we know her. Our childhood memories are her in the movie Matilda, which is a great movie. But she was sort of she's the creator, the god figure in this film because she plays Ruth. I forget her last name. The creator of Barbie, the real person who created Barbie. And so what did we think about that? There's like 2 scenes where she appears. And we had some thoughts.
Yeah. So the first time we're introduced to her is when, man, this movie's such a mess. It's like hard to even explain. Okay. So Barbie's like running from the CEO and the CFO of Mattel because they want to like put her back in the box because they know she got into the real world. And they're like, oh no.
Even though their motivations for this are entirely unclear.
Completely unclear. Like why do they care that she got very horrible rating? Yeah. Anyway, on her way out, her mad escape from the Mattel headquarters, she takes a turn and runs into Rhea Perlman as like a ghost on like the 17th floor or something, and she has like tea with her. But it almost reminded me of the scene in The Matrix where Neo meets the Oracle, and that scene is fire because that woman says things you remember, and she actually is wise. And in this scene, nothing wise was said. There was no wisdom imparted from this like old lady figure. And then she just is like, the exit's that way, and she leaves. And
like, let's talk about like Jungian archetypes, right? The like wise old man or wise old woman archetype.
Yeah.
It's like universal archetype that we see in a lot of media. I mean, like, even like Gandalf, he's like the wise old man that like gives Frodo wisdom on his journey, right? We are hungry for that, but it was just so poorly done.
Oh, it was so disappointing.
So
many disappointments. Yeah. And then like at the end was horrible with her. I was like, stop this scene.
Barbie has like a King's Cross moment. You notice that?
King's Cross moment, which is a Harry Potter reference to when Harry goes to this liminal space between death and life and talks to Dumbledore, and Dumbledore kind of like gives
once again the wise old man
gives him like coaching through kind of like a saint figure or like something like that, giving him.
It's a resurrection scene.
Yeah, it's like
in Harry
it's like
Potter.
you've been through chaos, and then you're at a crossroads, King's Cross. Like, are you going to choose this or this? And Barbie has this moment where she's like, "Do I choose?" I don't. She's like, it's
kind of a
not
mess.
even making it better than it is executed. Like,
Yeah,
it should be a moment where she's like, "Do I choose Barbie Land or the real world?" And she's at a crossroads. But instead, Rhea Perlman like asked her to hold her hands and is like, "No, let me just send you like images of like what real life is like," and it's all positive images of women. So that isn't real life. No, it's completely not what the real world is like. There's like men and children and
she
death.
prefaces it by saying, "I'm going to show you what it's. If you choose to be human, I'm going to show you what it's really like," and then doesn't show her what it's really like
at all.
She just shows happiness.
Totally out of touch. Yeah, and it's like she's cringe. And then the worst part of the ending of this movie, Barbie's like in a car in shitty. Sorry,
it looks
Los Angeles.
It looks like she's going to a corporate job.
Yeah, it looks like she. And we're like, she got a job. Is this really what like this magical
best you can come up with
woman chose to do? This magical doll chooses to be a like where she's wearing this horribly like ugly colored like that like suit jacket, like it's like brown. And you're like, oh, she's going to work. But she gets out and she goes up to a front desk and they're like, "Can I help you?" And she's like, "I'm here to see my gynecologist." And that's the end of the movie because it's like, oh, now she has a vagina and she's a real woman. It's like, who wants that for Barbie? Going to the gynecologist is horrible. Every woman hates it. That's a horrible, and that line is totally inappropriate for young kids. Yeah. Like they're gonna go, "Mommy, what's a gynecologist?" And then
awful.
It was awful.
It's like you laugh, but you're like,
I remember People magazine wrote like, "Oh, the last line is sure to be a classic line." I'm like, no. It shouldn't be. Like this.
I actually think people aren't going to remember this movie because it is not archetypal. It doesn't hit that. It doesn't. The hero's journey is like not well executed. It just doesn't hit. It doesn't hit. And
no.
I want to talk about a little bit about something I read in the New York Times. With Greta Gerwig, the writer and the director, and how she talks about the Rhea Perlman character of Ruth. And she says, quote, "The idea of a loving God who's a mother, a grandmother, who looks at you and says, 'Honey, you're doing okay,' is something I feel like I need and I wanted to give to other people." So we were talking about this, right? The idea of God as a mother. Okay. So obviously in Christianity, God is a father. And I noticed this modern sort of new age idea of God being a woman. Ariana Grande has a song, God is a woman, right? That's a thing. And we just see this a lot where like very feminist figures want to imagine God as a woman.
It's all pride.
Can you talk a little bit about that? We were talking about why that's
yes.
wrong.
So
we might theologically butcher this a bit.
Sure.
We're no theologians.
No theologians here, but people, you hear this all the time. People have problems. Well, why does God have to be a man? Because it's a human metaphor that more accurately describes God's relationship with us. A paternal relationship is more accurate for God than a maternal one. So God like gives and imparts life on the earth. He provides life to the earth. He like gives life to the earth and infuses it with life. That's a penetrative force. That's like a male force. So it's a sexual metaphor because and obviously God is beyond gender and we can't, and sex, right? But it's just a way of like how we as humans in an earthly way can explain our relationship with him and also the father is more distant than a mother. You know, when you're born, everyone's very close to their mother. Physically, you're on her body, and dad's a little more distant and unknowable. And as you grow, you develop in your relationship with your father, hopefully. And
you have to turn to
have to turn to your father. You're automatically bonded to your mother. You have to, of your own free will, turn to your father and develop a relationship with him.
And it's the same.
That is the same with God, because God leaves you alone, gives you free will until you.
It feels like he's not physically there, right? That's the whole atheist backdrop is, but I can't see, touch, or feel with my senses, with my science brain, which is all about the observable and physical touching world, right? That's their whole argument. So just by nature, you have to want to know God, turn to God when he is more distant. So when I read that Greta Gerwig had said this, I was like, okay, we're gonna get that those modern ideas infused into this film.
I would say fathers are more abstract than mothers. I mean, maybe I sound ridiculous, but like the role of the father, I remember as a young girl not really understanding. I was like, why do we live with my dad? Like I loved him, but I was like, why can't it just be the girls? Like I had that question because it was me and my sisters and my mom and my dad. My dad was the only male in the house. I didn't really understand his role because it was kind of unseen. I didn't see that he was going to work and bringing in money so that we could have the structure of the house. I saw my mom all day and I was like, well, it looks like she's doing more, because I just couldn't see what my dad was doing. And God is like that too. He's very mysterious. You don't always see what he's doing, but he's there like working to provide for you and love you.
Yep.
So
and then
this modern idea of people think they're so enlightened.
And the other thing I wanted to mention as well is that in this article, I was reading about how Mattel. So when we were growing up, we had different types of Barbies. We had Skipper and Teresa.
Who is Skipper?
Her little sister.
Yeah, she was a teenager.
Little sister. Teresa was her friend. We liked Teresa.
Teresa was Med
because we're Italian, and Teresa had a little bit of darker olive skin and dark hair. So
she might have been supposed to be Latina, but whatever.
We don't know. Whatever. We'll call her Mediterranean. So we liked her. Okay. And then Ken and all that. So what I learned reading up about this movie is that Mattel was having financial struggles. The Bratz dolls were competing with Barbie in, I guess that would have been like the earlier mid 2000s. And they made a lot of changes. And one of the changes that they made is that they discontinued all of Barbie's like friends and sister dolls. And I was thinking about that kind of from a Christian standpoint as well, because Greta Gerwig comments on this decision by Mattel. So now the Barbie universe no longer has friend characters, and you'll see this in the movie. Barbie is Barbie. Everybody's Barbie, right? In the Barbie world. And so Greta Gerwig says, quote, all of these women are Barbie, and Barbie is all of these women. She remembers the executives telling her, and the same went for Ken. And then, quote, Gerwig says, but this is extraordinary. This is very high spiritual work that they've done. You can sort of stumble into poetry that selfhood is contained amongst all these people.
Very California.
This is a very California idea of us being all one and being the same consciousness, experiencing itself through other people. If that's true, then existence and eternity is very lonely because there's no relating. The idea in Christianity is that we are separate beings, right? And even God, the Father, and the Holy Spirit are like separate things. Obviously, God is uncreated and the Holy Spirit is uncreated, but and Christ is begotten, not made. But in the world that like we all exist in, we are relational beings. And we had a lot of fun when we were younger playing with Teresa and Skipper and making like a family of these like separate characters that related to one another. So I don't know. I read this and I didn't like it. I didn't like that decision by Mattel. I thought that Gerwig's commentary on it sounded very like new age and modern, and this whole like all one thing, we're all the same thing experiencing itself. And
it really erases it erases your individual personhood. Your persona is kind of that's very rooted in like this Buddhist idea that we're supposed to just like melt into the oneness and like transcend our, like the ego is always bad, when actually like you need an ego, you need an identity, and God wants you to have an identity and wants to love you as you individually. And we're not all supposed to just like remove our personhood so we can all have the same spirit inside. I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah. And
it's really sad idea.
We're relational beings. In Christianity, the idea is that we're all separate individuals, but there's separation but oneness at the same time. It's a paradox. That's what I love about Christianity, is there's so much like paradox. So to remove Barbie's relationships is a sad idea. I thought
sad.
And
I liked Teresa.
Yeah.
And she had friends and like
And then something else I learned is that whenever Barbie came out, customers wanted her to have a boyfriend, so they created Ken. And I guess this would have been the early 60s.
So it was demand generated.
It was demand. And then according to the New York Times article, they wanted her to have a baby. And the creator, Ruth Handler, that's her name, she was like, no. So they made Babysitter Barbie, but they didn't make Barbie with a daughter, right? So again, you have this idea that Barbie is like a career woman and she helps people through her career, but it's like, besides Ken, they don't really and I guess Skipper.
They don't give her a
They don't give her a
family.
family. And it's like, and I'm thinking like, okay, well, if she can be an astronaut and a doctor and a lawyer, why can't she also be a mom? Like, it's a very,
It was reactionary to the times. Because
Yeah.
at one point, all women were expected to do was be mothers, I guess. And sometimes I'm like, is that even true?
and she was
But-
created out of Ruth Handler's observation that girls only had baby dolls to play with and didn't have any like dolls to act out like adulthood through.
Which
So-
is like, we were talking about this as well. It's a developmental phase for like young girls to play with baby dolls. They're in the imitation phase of development. They're imitating their mothers. And I don't know, you don't really need to like think too hard about that. Like, it's just natural. It's like, yeah, mommy holds me as a baby, and now I want to be like mommy and hold a baby and feed the baby, and like, it's just normal.
Well, I'm no expert on this, but apparently it is important for human development to go through
To
like
imitate.
an imitation phase.
Yeah.
And it's it's a part of how we learn. Okay, so we'll wrap up soon. Do we have any other thoughts here that we want to share?
Well, I wanted to say that like Barbie was really pushed as like a career woman, but we never played with Barbie as a career woman. Like,
No.
because when you're young like that, you don't even know what a career is. Like, you're in a home environment. So like everything we acted out was like silly home scenarios. They're cooking, they're eating food, they're going to bed. Somebody went to the store, like they come back, they have little it was all home based because we were like 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Like we
all
never
we knew was our
all we
family.
knew was our family. Like, so to
Yeah.
encourage young girls to like have careers, they're like, what's that?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think they even know like,
Yeah.
what it is. We would play school and home. We played a lot of like weird things too, but
Mhm.
in the Barbie universe, it was like they were, I think, did we ever play that they were at school? Because we went to school, but anyway, we never were like, she's an astronaut, because it's like, what do you do with that? Like, we don't know what it takes to be an astronaut, you know. Maybe the whole point is to like get women to think about it, but no one cares. We just wanted them to eat food and go to bed and do silly things. So
I have fun with their families.
yeah, have fun with their families.
Okay, so if you had to sum up the Barbie movie in like one word, what word?
Hot, kind of 2 words. Hot mess, because it's hot and it's really visually cool. Visually cool.
It's a visual feast.
It's a visual feast, but it's a mess. It's like,
Yeah,
doesn't make any sense.
yeah.
And it's not satisfying to the human need for story.
An
It
archetype
doesn't satisfy your
Doesn't
need for a good story at all.
doesn't
at all.
satisfy archetypal reality. I would say the word that comes to mind for me is disjointed. That word just kept
Yeah.
coming up. This is disjointed. It's just or a mess.
Yeah, it's not like a whole body.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was gonna say something else about it. It's just a mess. And it kind of made me feel a little crazy at some points, because I was like, what, like, I was like, just like my body language was speaking for me. It was difficult to watch because it was so disjointed and discombobulated. And
We were saying that
Out of
we
focus.
feel like a lot of modern movies just need a really good editor and critical feedback. And our experience having lived in California is that people don't like critical feedback or like
they don't like to
critical thought.
think. They don't like to think.
It's manifesting in our movies, this culture of yes, this culture of yes, queen, yes, you're great, whatever. It's like they're now
I think you
applying
did a great
that
job.
to movie scripts. And it's like no one's looking at this and going, well, you
This
know
doesn't
what?
make any
This
sense.
doesn't make sense. Like, why does Barbie walk into the lunch area and some random kid warns her about the girl and then that character just like stuff doesn't make sense. A bunch of stuff didn't.
Also, like, the lack of critical thought. Like, so when Ken goes through his patriarchy arc and he wants to be patriarchal, the outfit he picks looks like a
Burning
like
Man.
a soy boy at Burning Man. Like, that's what he picks as his patriarchy outfit. It's like this like mink coat and like a hippie band and like fringe. It's like no. Like,
Very LA.
Like, it was just such an LA person's idea of masculinity. Like,
And it would have been really interesting to watch Ken think that he needs to be more patriarchal. And this is something, this could be a whole other podcast. We see on Twitter all the time, men who are trying to embody masculinity and masculine virtues and kind of getting it wrong and becoming this like caricature of masculinity that's like overbearing to like,
my wife's gonna listen to whatever I say.
yeah.
And well, like just this
And it
douchey
would've-
Andrew
It
Tate
would have
thing.
been really interesting to have a Barbie movie have this like patriarchal tyranny come upon Barbie world, but the way that they needed to overcome that would have been through coming together in virtue and working together and like taking each other's needs into account, having a true relationship between Barbie and Ken.
more synergy, and
It was just Never
like a
established.
nice like redemption and a conclusion that tied together nicely. It just didn't come together in a way that felt like satisfying. You're gonna feel very hungry after this movie.
It's not
like
gonna satisfy.
Starved for good narrative, because this was not good
If you want a fish out of water story, watch
Life Size,
Elf. Legally Blonde's
Legally
fine.
Blonde's all right. It's kind of sad at the end that she becomes like a girl. I don't know. It all depends what you think. About.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for listening. We would love to hear other people's thoughts on Barbie, but these are ours.
And please visit our Mystic Sisters Substack. We'll put the URL in the description here. And please visit my art website. It's amy-the-artist.com. I sell religious art prints and original paintings, oil paintings. And subscribe. Please subscribe to my art newsletter and to the Mystic Sisters Substack.
Yep, we share more writing there, cultural commentary,
it's like fun stuff.
Just fun stuff.
Fun girly topics through our lens.
Yeah. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.